My first guest today is an author who's had a love affair with Australian history and its characters right throughout these eras, for as long as he can remember. His latest book is called Somewhere in France. It's the story of a man called Rod Whitelaw, who enlisted in the AIF in 1915, firmly believing that he'd be home for Christmas. Please welcome Allan Nixon. Welcome, Allan. Who was Roy Whitelaw?
Roy Whitelaw was a typical Australian soldier. He went off to war, as you say, believing he'd be home by Christmas. I originally set out to write a book about my grandfather and came across the collection of Roy Whitelaw, and I realised I'd found the story of a typical Australian soldier, and so that's what I set out to do, was to tell his story, but I believe also telling the story of ordinary Australians.
It's very easy, Allan, for someone like myself to eulogise about what they did during the wars, particularly the First World War, which was the first major one we suffered in this country. It's very easy for me to espouse the virtues of what those blokes did, and the women. But what was it really like for them in those years, the First World War, particularly in the trenches of France?
I think as a historian as such, I spent a lot of time going through old records, letters, diaries, etc. Horrific is the only way I can describe it. You imagine your clothes, your body covered in lice, you're in snow, in trenches filled with mud, up above your knees in mud. Come the end of the day, you would sleep wherever you could, and all around you, your mates were dying, and people that you'd known for many years were simply being blown away. And I think that's the horror of war. That's the thing that we must thank these people for. They fought believing what they were doing for Australia. If you were to ask someone to do that today, it would be a horrific thing to go through what those men went through, and this is my personal tribute to all of them.
Let me ask you, this is a question almost on behalf of my late father, who died as the result of war injuries, and he was in both the First World War and the Second World War. What were the British officers like to our blokes in the First World War?
Once again, horrific, I'd have to say. I don't have much thought for the British. I think when you look at the way Australians were treated, we lost 60,000 men in war, more than any other country who sent men to war. The ordinary British soldier got on very well with the Australians. It was the officers that Australians really detested, because they were always put into the front line of fighting. At one stage, Australians held over 30% of the entire British line. But we really suffered, and they were treated with... we were the mere colonials and there to do what we were told.
I'm very pleased, though, that you made the distinction between the officers and the ordinary bloke in the British forces, because the Tommies and the Aussies got along pretty well, didn't they?
Yes, very much so, as they did with the Americans and the Canadians and the New Zealanders. But the officers will be remembered for many generations as being pretty bad, particularly to Australians.
Allan, as a devil's advocate, somewhere in France, how is that relative to today's society?
Well, I think it's very relative. I spent a lot of time going through schools throughout New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, talking to young children who simply don't understand what these men and women went through. And so today, in our society, we owe a great debt to these people. And one day in the year we stop to remember them, but I believe that we should remember them right throughout, all days throughout the year, because, I'm a grandson of two men who went to World War I. I'm a son of a man who, my father went to World War II. Without that dedication that they went through, perhaps we wouldn't be sitting here now.
True. Allan, thank you very much indeed, and good luck with Somewhere in France.
Thanks very much.
Allan Nixon.